Hi, I'm Kevin, and this is Novel to You, where I read fiction so you can enjoy it, listen to it while you're jogging or sweeping the floor, commuting, riding your bike, painting the house, whatever you do, right? I hope you enjoy it. We are reading from Taemane, my book. Taemane means diamond in Bantu, and this book is set in a diamond mine in South Africa in the 1950s. This is episode 6, and we're doing Chapter 6. Here we go. The constant rattle of the train had at first annoyed her. So had the springs in the worn seats, but she was happy to have a reserved compartment where she could be with her own thoughts. The final leg of the journey had been 4 hours, and the anticipation of returning after 3 years consumed her thoughts. The flush of excitement on her neck made the last leg of the trip that much longer. It had burned her chest, palms, even her breasts for hours. The jitter of excitement washed through her with each imagined thought of him. It was childish and silly, she knew that, and therefore she relished it that much more. Her mind, drunk with fantasies, would drift between the horror of her sister and the magic of being back between the two men she loved, especially him. She shook her head. The thoughts were intoxicating and wonderful, but she knew she would have to harness them. Claire and her father had visited her twice while she was away at school. It was ironic that the only man Carl would trust to oversee the mine while he was away was Alex, and he had rammed the fact down Claire's throat. Claire had never forgotten it. When they did arrive, Kate was thrilled to show them around and introduce her father to the faculty at the school, who were all very kind and knew of his mine. Even Claire relaxed in the proximity of other young white men and tried to be charming. It had been obvious at the outset why Claire had insisted on the trip, even though it left the mine slightly exposed. Claire would rather risk a drop in output than endure the joy Kate and Alex shared on the one trip back to the mine that she had made during her boarding school years. At that time, they had been apart only a year, but he had already seemed to have changed so much. He was bigger and more handsome, a real man. When she returned, they were completely inseparable. She would wait for him to finish his shift at the mine, and then they would spend hours together, just sitting and chatting on the grass. Claire accused her of making a fool of the family. It led to an unholy fight and ended up with her father having to lay up in bed, ill. Claire manipulated it so that Alex had to accompany a truck to the Cape, and in that way broke their few days together. The fights continued, and Kate was virtually forced to leave in order to keep their father's health stable. Since then, she had sent books back to Father Stanley, also a few photos of her and her school activities. It was through Father Stanley that they kept their romance going. The stout little minister had become a vital link in keeping them together. She dreamed if he might one day marry them. She mustn't expect too much. It had been 3 years. He might not find her attractive. He might not want her. She slammed her palm against her head. She must stop these thoughts. They had been circling in her mind like vultures for weeks and exhausted her. She would distract herself. She glanced across the booth. There had been only one other traveler on this part of the journey. He was a businessman setting up a brewery in South Africa. They had chatted in aimless politeness, but her thoughts were elsewhere, and the conversation soon died off. He now lay rumpled in his striped suit, propped against the burgundy velour seats, fast asleep. He snored incessantly, and spittle flowed in 2-minute intervals onto his tie. She gazed out the countryside, home at last. It had been nice to be visited at school by her father and Claire, but it was Alex she wanted to see. In fact, it was all she wanted. She had already asked her instructors if she could finish her final paper from home rather than make the journey again. They believed her when she explained her father's illness, and that was part of it too. But in truth, she didn't want to be away from Alex again. But would he feel the same? Had he changed? He was a man now and had been forced to work in the mine. But that could all change. She felt the love vultures of doubt circling in her mind again. She looked down at the letter in her hands. She had read it so many times. She had committed it to memory. She unconsciously unfolded the letter like smoothing a lock of hair. She gazed at his neat script. I have done what you suggested, and Father Stanley tells me my English and math are good enough to teach the little ones at the church 2 or 3 evenings a week. I go on days when I work mornings, then teach at the church until 7. Some of the children are very bright, especially the girls. The boys, they just want to play football. Work at the mine is hard, but becomes easy when I think of you. I know it has been 3 years, and you have many experiences. Father Stanley tells me people change when they travel and see new things. I understand that, and I am not much of anything, but please remember, I will always be yours, Alex. She softly kissed the letter and opened the valise on her lap. Inside, wrapped in a purple silk cloth, was a neatly wrapped bundle of letters, hundreds of them. She opened the bundle and placed the letter with the others. She retied the silk, packed it with tenderness among her treasures, and closed the case. She gazed out the window and fiddled with the 2 wooden rings worn around her wrist. She spun them around and around. They never left her wrist. The 2 rings, made from one solid piece of wood, were cross-linked and bore her and Alex's names. It was her going-away present from him. She looked at herself in the window, and a fear flashed across her mind. What if she wasn't attractive enough anymore? They had been just teenagers, but he was a man now. She had developed, but wasn't very tall and didn't have the strength of African women. Her body was attractive, at least people seemed to say so. She didn't have big breasts, if that mattered, but she was his if he wanted her. Would he want her as a woman? As a lover? Would she know what to do? She would have to ask Mary. Oh, how could she do that? It was madness. It was a divine madness. People would talk and protest, well, especially Claire. She spun the wooden bracelet on her wrist. It was polished ebony, smooth and honest, the color of Alex's skin. She rubbed the wood up and down her arm, imagining his fingers caressing, drifting across her. An issue she loathed wedged into her thoughts. It began to wriggle. To Kate, it was like a dying snake. It caused her trouble at the private school. It would cause trouble with Claire. Kate refused to accept Claire's racism, the poisonous division of white over black. Claire refused to accept any other possibility. Kate was different. She knew her father looked at men by their honesty and ability to look after their family and themselves. Color was not a prerequisite to position. Position came from respect. That had to be earned. Kate knew it. She believed it and was willing to give her love to and her life to a man for it. Alex's face popped into her mind. Would he want her? Would she be good enough woman for such a man? Would. She shook her head and rubbed her temples. It was her goal. Many said she was a terrier, just like her mother. Perhaps she was prepared to fight for him, to win him. Her love would not crumble without a fight. Only he could decide her fate. It didn't really matter what others said. It was Alex. Only Alex that counted. But she would love him anyway, even if he didn't want her. She shook her head. She was going mad with anticipation. She thought about the snarling blonde face of Claire. She would have to be more careful. They weren't little girls anymore, and her father had grown much worse. She took a deep breath and tried to clear her mind to sleep. She toyed with the rings. Soon. She would see him soon. Chapter 7. Like sandpaper on wood, a grating drawn back and forth, over and over, Mary could hear his labored breathing. She stood behind him at the corner of the veranda and watched the old man as he leaned against the railing. It was the 3-week shift change, and the mine was quiet. She knew what he wanted, without asking, and slipped away. Carl Ostenstadt's gaze drank the entire property, from the manicured lawns down past the old well to the drive and the main office buildings. Beyond the office buildings were the workshops, storage, and the main slurry house where the blue soil brought from the pipe was mixed with stream water. To the left was the main pit and the elevator house that took the men down to the shafts. The open pit production had slowed a decade ago, and the shaft mining had begun in earnest. It was more costly to establish, but tended to yield better quality diamonds with fewer accidents and far fewer men in the labor force. There were 3 shafts of soil, and each was about 500 yards long and about 150 yards deep at the deepest point. Initially, there had been 4, long ago, but those were the early days of the shaft process. That one shaft had been a splinter in his soul. It was on the south side, far from the others. The blue pipe soul had become less productive, and then collapsed, killing 3 workers, including Mary's husband. The area became unstable. The bodies were never recovered, and he sealed it off completely. He had forced Father Stanley to go down into the open pit to perform burial rites before the sealed shaft entrance for the men entombed in the collapsed shaft. It had been a simple service at the start of a 3-week shift, but had been well attended. Thomas was a good man, a friend never replaced in his heart, nor in the enormous heart of Thomas's devoted Mary. On only 2 occasions in over 30 years had Mary ever cried or shown a weakness in front of him. Once when he told her about the loss of Thomas, and the second when she was on her knees telling him they had lost Beth. He was not a man moved by emotions, but those 2 events, only days apart, had soldered a part of Mary to him. He would always protect her. Carl looked further off to the right. The road that led through the wide, high-fenced perimeter and wound around a small bluff to the worker compound. It was not a jail, but security was maintained and understood by all the workers. He could see the roofs of the 4 barracks, each neatly arranged and whitewashed. There were washing, bathing, and cookhouses, all arranged and maintained by the company. Just to the left was a small, flat area with a few wobbly soccer nets. Many of his fellow mine holders had thought his worker provisions were excessive and a waste of cash, but he was adamant in treating a man like a man. Other operators came and went, having squeezed their fortune from the land and raped the spirit of the people. It wasn't his way. He easily, over 30 years, had amassed a fortune far greater than theirs, but he had also done something more. He had a legacy for his daughters in a tough land that would provide and protect them. He had earned an understanding and a respect from both the land and the people, which even his fortune could not buy. The tinkle of the glass made him turn to see Mary approach. He moved to a chair and was taken by a bout of coughing. She helped him down to the chair and held a cloth to his face. He was noticeably weaker. Mary calmed him as she had for years. She was fond of the old man, but had begun to fear he was hanging on just to see his Katie again. Yet he still had a sense of humor. "Are you sure this is what you need?" she asked. Eh? Best thing for it. Doctor's orders. I have a list from Dr. Villers, and I didn't see a gin and tonic on it. Really? It was there. Perhaps it was an oversight. His wink made her laugh, and she tapped his wrinkled hand. She followed his gaze out the front gate. He was watching, waiting. Your watching for her won't make her arrive any faster. Oh, I know. We always wait for them, don't we, Mary? She returned his smile as they both searched for the sign of an approaching vehicle. His tone changed and was slightly hushed. Alex is doing well at the mine. He's strong, amazingly so. Everyone thinks he's a bloody rhino. He's also so funny, kind of silly, like Thomas was. He's a very popular lad. I can see why Kate and he always got on. Does he know she's coming back? Carl knew the answer perfectly well. He's an excited puppy. They have been writing to each other for the past 4 years, twice a week. What? I didn't know he'd taken any schooling. Pride rushed forth from Mary. Oh, yes. He didn't tell you? I thought you two talked about everything. Well, everything, but the one person in his heart. As soon as Kate left, he went to Father Stanley to learn. Father Stanley also says he's very good at numbers. He has Alex do all the accounting for the church. I believe he does all the records for 2 of the other ranchers nearby, at the church in the evenings. He does it for the Van der Sars and someone else. The Van der Sars? That tight old git? Alex must be good to do a job for that penny pincher. I suppose. He's been doing it for 2 years. Alex teaches some of the young ones as well, though I don't think he's a very good teacher. Really? How does he find time for that? He goes after he finishes his morning shifts 3 times a week. I think he has about 25 students. Why the hell doesn't I know that? Why do you keep this secret from me? It's totally unfair. His chest began to pump with indignation. He was hurt by not knowing. His face reddened and he tried to suppress another coughing fit. And why the hell is he down the mine? Mary was taken aback by the force of the old man. She had no idea what to say. It was as if it was a personal crime against him. He slammed his drink down and leaned forward. He realized he had overreacted. Sorry, Mary. He lowered his voice, his breathing calmed. Mary, we could use him in the office. Do you think he'd go for that? He wouldn't be able to use that massive body of his, but we really do need someone who can do that sort of accounting thing. He would, I'm sure, but I'm not sure about Miss Claire. She has never liked him too much, whereas Katie, well, we'll just have to find a way to change Claire's thinking. Shouldn't be difficult if we tell her it'll boost profits. He laughed, but a fit of rasped coughing shook him through, and Mary had to comfort him again. We'll stop there for today. That's the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. We're reading Taemane, and until we see you next time, that's all for now. Cheers.